We'll study three major circulation pathways within the human cardiovascular system. And first, we are going to examine the pulmonary circuit, which describes the blood flow to and from the lungs for the purposes of gas exchange. So from the right atrium and then to the right ventricle, blood will move from the right ventricle to the pulmonary arteries, and then finally on to the pulmonary capillaries of the lungs. It's here at the pulmonary capillaries that hemoglobin can be loaded with oxygen. It's also here in the pulmonary capillaries that blood will eliminate its carbon dioxide waste. Then the blood will return to the heart through the pulmonary veins to the left atrium. So figure 19.4 shows the major circulation pathways. Specifically, the diagram highlights the pulmonary and systemic circuits. For the moment, we'll examine the pulmonary circuit. So within the pulmonary circuit, we see blood from the right atrium being pumped to the right ventricle. And then when the right ventricle pumps, it's going to deliver that blood to the pulmonary arteries. The pulmonary arteries will direct blood to the pulmonary capillaries, where that gas exchange is going to occur. And finally, blood will return through the pulmonary veins to the heart, the left atrium specifically of the heart. So next is the systemic circuit, which represents blood flow to and from all other structures in the body, that is, except to the pulmonary capillaries in the lungs, because as we just examined, the pulmonary circuit is what delivers blood to those pulmonary capillaries. So examining the systemic circuit, we see that from the left atrium, when the left atrium pumps, it moves blood to the left ventricle. When the left ventricle pumps, it's going to move blood through the systemic arteries and then to the systemic capillaries in the upper body, the lower body, the upper limbs, and the lower limbs. The systemic capillaries will then deliver oxygen and nutrients to all of the tissues that those capillaries serve. At the same time, those systemic capillaries are going to pick up waste and carbon dioxide from those tissues. And then from the systemic capillaries, blood will return through the systemic veins back to the right atrium of the heart. Returning to figure 19.4, beginning at the left atrium, blood is pumped to the left ventricle. And when the left ventricle contracts and pumps its blood, it pushes that blood into the aorta. The aorta is the body's main systemic artery, which will then branch and become all of the other systemic arteries in the body that eventually leads to the systemic capillaries in the upper and lower parts of the body. Blood passing through these systemic capillaries will deliver the oxygen and nutrients that it is carrying, in addition to picking up wastes and carbon dioxide from those tissues. Blood will then leave the systemic capillaries, entering the systemic veins. The systemic veins eventually deliver blood to the right atrium of the heart. Finally, we will examine the coronary circuit, which is describing blood flow to and from the cardiac muscle in order to nourish the heart muscle tissue. The coronary circuit is actually a branch of the systemic circulation. So from the left atrium, when the left atrium contracts, it's going to push blood into the left ventricle. That blood will then move from the left ventricle when the left ventricle contracts into the aorta, just as we saw with the systemic circuit. And some of that blood is going to be delivered to the small coronary arteries and then eventually to coronary capillary beds that nourish the cardiac muscle tissue. Those coronary capillaries will deliver oxygen and nutrients to the cardiac muscle tissue, in addition to picking up wastes and carbon dioxide from cardiac muscle. And then from there, blood will leave the coronary capillaries. It will return through coronary veins to the right atrium.